tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So, feeling into this collection of questions or ingredients for the cake. There's a few questions that touch on liberation, Nibbāna or Nirvana, and related related states or understandings, emptiness, the nature of the self. And so I'm going to start actually with the this question that's in a certain way more about the technique of practice. A question about this Pali term samvega or saṁvega. This is a term in Pali that refers to an intense urge or energy in practice. So intense desire for liberation. It's like your intention for freedom, but it's it's sometimes translated as a kind of urgency. It's the energy behind that, where the Buddha would say things like, life is short. The conditions that you are experiencing right now are precious, and the future is uncertain. Practice now, lest you regret it later. That's a saṁvega kind of teaching, and I'll notice it in myself sometimes when I'm feeling lax in my practice, and I'll kind of think like, I don't know how much further I'm really going to get in this lifetime, like liberation-wise, but I'll just pick up the thread next time, as long as I don't really screw up with my precepts and get a bad rebirth. I could just like hope that things go better, and I'll have more opportunities to practice. And in a certain way, this is a very Pure Land kind of thing to think. Some of the Pure Land traditions start with the assumption that practice is very difficult and liberation is hard to come by. And so the thing to do is to develop the fervent wish to be reborn in a much better place that's conducive to practice, namely the Pure Land of Amida Buddha, the Pure Land Buddha in the West. And so you vow to be reborn in the land of Amida, where you can much more successfully practice for Buddhahood. And so the feeling of urgency, in a certain way, is core to practice in all of the traditions, because there's this recognition that there's something precious about this life we find ourselves in. And some of the later traditions would be very specific about this. The Tibetans have a list of 18 factors of the precious human birth that include things like having the physical and mental faculties that make it conducive to practice, and then the economic capacities. You have enough, material support, enough health, enough, cognitive faculty to be able to do the practice. In modern language, I would say enough support to come out of trauma and states of development or attachment rupture that would make it hard to practice. Basically, a healed enough, and that touches into a little bit the question on healing and therapy, but a healed enough or potential for healing enough that you can be, in a way, internally coherent, in relation to the world. You can do your practice. You can actually sit down or, come into ethics in a way that is possible to succeed at. All of these are factors of the precious human birth. And there's an emphasis in many traditions that you just can't rely on those being the case for you in future births. This touches into a bit the teachings on kamma or karma, because where we are reborn is based on the conditions that have developed in our karmic stream through past lifetimes and the ones that we contribute to in this lifetime, primarily through the ethical or unethical nature of our actions, the skillful or unskillful nature of our actions. So then we get the interweave of samvega, which is a kind of, urgency or an intense longing to practice the path to success. And then the knowledge, the very basic teaching that it's the skillfulness of our actions that leads to our future state, whether you think of that as a future birth or just, how our life is when we grow further into adulthood, and beyond that. So, one thing that urgency helps with is it protects us from the kind of habitual or sort of kind of unconscious deluded states that we can so easily be in, right? One of the things that urgency is it's kind of a wake-up energy. So, if I wake up in the morning and I connect with the fact that this is, a precious day of relative health and good intentions and relatively good conditions to practice the Dharma, to serve others, to deepen in the good qualities of the path. If I can actually connect with both the way that I really believe in those things, that feels right to me, that's how I want to live, and that this day of these precious qualities being present, there's no guarantee that there will be more of these, right? Things could change very quickly, as we see things changing for ourselves at moments in our lives, or those around us, or folks in challenging circumstances anywhere in the world, that good fortune can change in an instant. And so Samvega really understands this and says, while I have the good fortune that I can feel and be with right now, may my practice be quite vigorous and dedicated. And then the way that we are practicing is that we're cultivating wise action, right? Ethics, and samadhi, clarity of heart and mind, so that we can see more clearly and rest into wise view, right? So Samvega gives the energy, the Eightfold Path is what we then practice. We do this because the heart of the Buddha's understanding of how the path develops is that we are present in a stream of unfolding experiences that is impersonal but appears personal. So there's not a kind of individual ownership of moments of experience, because the individual that owns a moment of experience can't be found, right? You can't find in yourself the one or the soul or the self or the I am or the this is mine, that owns an experience. Right now I feel pretty good, but who is it that feels really good? I can't find that anywhere. What I can find is I can find some pleasure. I can find some, I can find a clarity about relationality, like I know who I am in relation to y'all, right? That's a kind of self. That's a kind of, me. But that me is a product of the aggregates arising. There's consciousness, there's formations, there's perceptions, there's feelings, there's form. All of those things come together to give the felt sense of, being the one who's having this experience and who remembers past experiences. And the Buddha says, one of the things to recognize is that the feeling of being a self is completely fine, right? It's natural. That's what the aggregates do. That's what they feel like. The thing to snap out of is the idea or illusion that that feeling means that there is something eternal and unchanging that is experiencing those things. And this is the fundamental difference between the Buddhist karmic image and the Hindu karmic image. In the Hindu karmic image, there is a permanent soul that experiences changing experiences, and that in its fundamental nature is unchanging and eternal. And the pinnacle of Hindu thought in the Vedanta system is to realize that that soul is not separate from the singular soul that is God, Brahma. Eternal, unchanging, consistent. And everything happening around that is just like changes of clothing, not really you. The Buddha would say that eternal, unchanging thing, you can't find it. He doesn't say, no, that's not true. That's not his style. He's not actually a metaphysical teacher. He doesn't assert any grand metaphysical truths. What he says is, if you look for that thing, that soul that experiences the changes of clothing, you can't find it anywhere. And therefore, it's the wrong thing to look for. The thing to look for is how suffering ends. And one of the ways that suffering ends, or that, the cycle of endless rebirth into misery, the way that that ends is by realizing that nobody owns the experiences that you're having, that you can't find the owner of these experiences. Right? When the Buddha says, I was searching endlessly for the builder of this house. Lifetime after lifetime, I was searching for it. To be born again and again is so painful. I have seen you, house builder, and you will not build a house again. So there's this understanding that through determined practice and samadhi and exploration, the realization has taken root that all of the experiences that we have that feel like a solid, permanent soul are actually just part of the changing, conditioned nature of the aggregates arising and passing, right? Even my sense of being an awake, conscious person, this awake, conscious person, is just a mixture of the aggregate of consciousness, vijnana, mixing with the mental formations, the emotional formations of sankhara, mixing with the feelings and perceptions of vedana and sanya, all filtered through or experienced through the physical senses of this body, this form, rupa. So the aggregates conditioned, empty of self, empty of permanence, unfolding on their own based on conditions. Into that mix, we bring the energy of urgency and we make choices. And with those choices, we make skillful or unskillful choices. This creates further momentum in our karmic stream. So I make skillful choices and I set up the conditions for wholesome states tomorrow and the day after that, right? If I do something super unethical tonight, I will be miserable tomorrow because that's how it works, right? I've hurt someone or myself, and the heart can't do that and escape the consequences. You will feel it. And then the Buddha says, yeah, and if you keep doing that, or if you do that in a particularly egregious way, that follows you into the next life. That's not a metaphysical claim. That's more like, an ecosystem claim that, if a forest ecosystem is deeply harmed, the trees will grow stunted or warped. You can think of this as an early intuition of the Buddhas toward what we might nowadays call, like ancestral or generational trauma, right? That painful conditions can be passed from parent to child, Sometimes when I'm super frustrated and I bark at my kid, I recognize the voice. And I'm like, hey, Dad, that's you. Where'd you come from? You're supposed to be dead. but there you are, right? Um, One of my friends who's a parent, said yeah, basically 90% of parenting is trying not to be my mom. And I was like, yeah, you know, sometimes it feels like that, right? Like that's karma, right? That's like the conditions that you inherit come forward with you, right? Sometimes it's more than familial, you know. I grew up in a culture that um, you know gives some amount of social power to um, to intelligent, well-read, cisgendered men, and I've been called all of those things. So I have a certain position in this culture of privilege. But I also grew up in a culture that that diminishes that privilege if your skin is a little brown, or your sensuality a little queer, or your expression of masculinity a little bit more femme. And I've also been called all of those things. And so then power comes toward one or away from one, or swirls around these bodies in different ways, because we come into cultures that have their own karma, right? So systemic racism or patriarchy or misogyny, or the long histories of tribalism and greed that turns into capitalism, all of those things are cultural karmas, and they create our rebirths, right? So my kid is now going to grow up into a world of crazy, technology and greed, and the way money moves around, and the way his life will be. And that's karma. So all of this is happening. We are immersed in it. We are born and we come into our adult consciousness, finding ourselves immersed in this flowing river of conditions that um, that we are fully embedded in, right? Fully immersed in. The only way this system can work such that liberation is possible is that this flow of karma, this flow of actions and their results, is completely interwoven with emptiness. If there were anything that were not empty, empty of self, empty of permanence, empty of unchangingness, or empty of change, right? If something was unchanging, if it didn't have change, if it was not empty but full of substance, which means eternalness, permanence, uh, you know, being the same thing forever, that substance could never be either bound or liberated, right? How could something be liberated if it's a single thing that never changes? The process where we can bring our energy, our urgency, make more skillful choices than our parents or our culture have taught us to do, that we can actually go, what the Buddha called, against the stream, do something different, and then attain a different result, like break the cycle of being reborn into pain and suffering. The only way that's possible is that there's nothing fixed in the universe. There's nothing permanent, eternal, unchanging. And so the way this comes out in the doctrine, I know this is getting a little dense, so we'll give a little time for questions at the end, but the way this comes out in the doctrine is that dependent origination, which is the cycle of conditionality, this depends on this, depends on this, depends on this, and emptiness, um, both are completely interwoven. Essentially, they are different ways of looking at the same thing, right? Everything, it can be conditioned by something else. In other words, it can arise and come into form based in conditions and dissolve based in conditions. That is only possible because all of the substance, including experiences in the world, is um, unfixed or empty. And I remember that empty isn't a substantive quality in itself. It doesn't mean that like, oh, emptiness is the eternal substance. Nah. Emptiness means empty of. And what are things empty of? They're empty of permanence. They're empty of stability. They're empty of immortality, right? They're empty of unchangingness. And so if I look at my own, let's say, consciousness is the aggregate that often most easily seems like a self, right? I look at the screen, I see y'all, see your faces, I recognize you, I enjoy the thing that we've created, I know who I am in relation to this. Like there's a consciousness of all that, and it feels like there's a self here in relation to it. What's happening there? The Buddha says consciousness is always consciousness of something. And in this case, there's seeing, right? I see the screen and your faces. There's hearing. I hear your voices when we're talking together. There's, smelling and tasting in whatever way. I know through my senses that I'm here in my room. There's thinking, right? I'm thinking about the Dharma. I'm thinking about your questions. I'm thinking about who exactly you all are and how I know you and what might be helpful. I'm feeling, right? I'm feeling various feelings. I feel joy, I feel interest, I feel some saṁvega. I like saṁvega, there's pleasure. So all of this is happening, and there's the temptation to allow the habitual feeling of the solid self to be unchallenged. I have some temptation to just let my habitual resting into identity be a kind of home, right? This is what happens when like ego gets too comfortable, right? It's like, yeah, this is me. I settle into like, this is what's happening. I own this in a certain way. Remember that identity in a certain way means ownership in the Dharma. Can you make it do what you want? That means that's the sign that you own something, right? So consciousness in the aggregates just means consciousness of the senses. And so what if I say what's actually happening here? I can say, oh, the seeing and hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, feeling, all of those conditioned phenomena arising are giving rise to a sense of being me here with you. And if that wasn't what was happening, if I was having some other experience, if I was out in the back field with a chainsaw dealing with, doing fuel reduction among the blackberry and the Doug firs, I feel like a different person. And if I really relax into it, and I say, yeah, but this is me. I'm also, I do the Dharma teaching and then I do the fuel reduction, and it feels like me. If I really feel into that, the consciousness of those very different experiences is different. And the conditions arising are different. And if I try to stitch them together, what I can feel is a thing that feels like a consistent self. But what I'm actually feeling is I'm feeling the karmic connection. I'm feeling the way that one thing led to another. And so the thing that actually persists is more like a kind of momentum, where I can feel that here I am now, but last week I was in the Grand Canyon, and a couple months ago I was down in the gully doing fuel reduction. And I can feel, if I really notice it, how one experience and the things that I did on that day, they led to the next experience, the next day's choices. And each choice has an impact and leads to the next thing. And this is exactly what the practice of vipassana, or seeing clearly, right? The investigation at the heart of mindfulness, this is exactly what it's supposed to do. The Buddha doesn't say there's no self, everything's empty. What he says is recognize the absence of a thing when you can't find it. Go looking for it, you can't find it, see that it's not there. And when you see that, the felt sense you get, this is sort of the early tradition's interpretation of emptiness, the felt sense you get is of a kind of absence of something, right? So the original metaphor is this Dharma hall is empty of elephants. There's no elephants in here. You can perceive it and you could recognize that there are no elephants here. Look at your ongoing experience. So you look at like your karmic stream. This is why mindfulness is memory. It takes remembering to look at actions and their impacts, choices and their effects, and say, in that stream of choices that led me from, choosing to move to the country, that was a clear condition for ending up in a gully doing fuel reduction with a chainsaw, which was a clear condition to being able to sit here and teach, knowing that our house isn't, in danger as fire season approaches, or just like I've done my work here on the land, like all the things. Or more subtly, I'm the kind of teacher who can weave an anecdote about fuel reduction into a Dharma talk. Like that's a conditioned phenomena based on the fact that I live here and I chose to move to the country, et cetera, et cetera. As it turns out, if I look at it, everything that I'm saying and everything that I'm feeling in response to where I am, I can feel, if I'm perceptive enough, I can feel backward into the conditions. I'm here because of this, and I was there because of that, and I was there because of that. And this is the thing the Buddha does on the night of his awakening. He says, when my mind was thus purified, clear, and malleable, I directed it toward the remembering of past homes, past births. And I remembered, here I was born in this clan of this appearance. I ate this kind of food. I did this kind of livelihood. I died in this way, and I was reborn here. And so he traced backwards. Oh, this lifetime contained these kinds of actions, and based in that, I was reborn here. But he goes backwards to do it. He said, I thought back, not just 1, 10, 100 lifetimes, not just thousands of lifetimes, but cosmic eons of the whole universe expanding and contracting. He remembers the universe expanding and contracting. This is an extraordinary mystical, beyond explanation kind of insight. But the conclusion that he gets from it is that this thing that appears to be a permanent self is not. That what can be perceived, if you can see clearly enough, is momentum. You can see that this lifetime leads to the next, and this one leads to the next, and they're all painful in their own ways. And when you see this, and you see how choices give rise to further forward motion, choices just give rise to more experiences, right? You do more things, you have more experiences, that just keeps going. It's been going for cosmic eons. The thing you recognize is that you have participated in this thing, not by being an eternal witness to the whole thing, somehow separate from it, but actually, more frightening than that in a certain way, not by being an eternal thing witnessing it all, but just that you can actually remember perceiving the flowing nature of experience for a long way back. So you can actually perceive the momentum that has led you to this place. And that momentum is the force of your wanting, how much you have craved stuff and experiences. And the more you crave, the more you come back looking for satisfaction. When the Buddha sees how deeply he has craved and how much he wanted over those countless cosmic eons, and how craving is the momentum, the craving drops away. You just don't need more experiences once you've had cosmic eons full of experiences. It's not about, am I going to stick around to serve others, or am I going to, leave the cycle? There's no sticking around or leaving, because there's not an eternal being doing anything. There's just this sudden opening to being aware of how momentum pours forward through time, and how pain or dukkha is the natural, inevitable result of this momentum pouring forward, because the momentum is craving. Craving is never satisfied, can't be, because non-impermanence. You can never fully satisfy craving, therefore you can never fully eliminate dukkha. Therefore, you see it and you're just done. And done is expressed in as Nibbāna, this term that means the extinguishing, because the fuel for further burning is gone, right? If you no longer crave, you no longer burn. And the idea is that the heat or the spark, which is craving, is separated from the fuel, which is the material of the senses. You continue sensing and experiencing, pleasure and pain as before. The body experiences pleasure and pain. That's completely natural. But the recognition that there's no one who owns any of it, that you're just watching the ecosystem flare and fluctuate over cosmic eons, that it's not even that you need to choose to not participate any longer, but that, the last thing to fall away is this final bit of conceit of self and restlessness, this way that, like, I'm just not quite ready to stop. You know that way when you're trying to relax and you can feel like, I would relax if I could, but my muscles just won't quite do it? That's like the last fetter is restlessness. And when that restlessness falls away, the image with Nibbāna is of a flame being blown out. That there's just no more craving. You've experienced everything. You know what it's like for a universe to expand and contract around you, and there's just a hollow core. The Buddha says, like a plantain tree, or a banana tree. There's no heartwood to a banana tree. It's just leaves, wrapped around an empty core. You cut it down, there's nothing left, right? There's nothing to find there. And so, emptiness is just the recognition of the absence of that core. There's no permanent being here. And when that realization was taken up by the later traditions, there was just the mystical, or sort of almost like vast sort of intuition that this didn't just refer to yourself. It wasn't just that your experience is empty of self, this hall is empty of elephants, but actually that everything everywhere, including all concepts, is empty of any kind of solidity whatsoever. So the concept empty is itself empty. The concept Buddha is an empty concept. Concepts, arise out of conditions. They are historical, they're cultural, they're empty. And so the Zen, or really the whole Mahayana intuition of emptiness, builds directly upon the Buddha's original teachings on it, which were very pragmatic, right? Just see the nature of karma and your participation in it. And they were like, yeah, actually, if you take this to its, full-blown conclusion, there fundamentally is nothing anywhere. Because any concept that you have of any solid thing immediately falls apart upon investigation, And so, you get then statements like this from the record of Rinzai. This is for Joni and our Zen background. I say to you, there is no Buddha, no Dharma, nothing to practice, nothing to prove. Just what are you seeking thus in the highways and byways? Blind men, you're putting a head on top of the one you already have. What do you yourself lack? Followers of the way, your own present activities do not differ from those of the patriarch Buddhas. You just don't believe this and keep on seeking outside. Make no mistake, outside there is no Dharma. Inside there is nothing to be obtained. Better than grasp at the words from my mouth, take it easy and do nothing. Easier said than done. But the principle that that's pointing to is that you have come into the path with this energy of saṁvega. You're really searching for the way. That's great. And paradoxically, you need that energy to accomplish Zen, to accomplish practice. You have to really practice to get anywhere or to get nowhere. But getting somewhere in the Dharma is going to end up bringing you to the point of realizing that everything just as it is already empty. And the challenge in practice is that it's not easy to rest your mind there. It's not easy to see that and not flinch back into the solid formation of like just believing the long habit of being someone, going somewhere. And so you flinch. It's right there, right? Nothing was ever not true. But this is why the Hindu folks will emphasize illusion, and various traditions will recognize that the only thing that's in the way of this Nibbāna is the way that clinging or grasping habitually fixates on solidity, and it's very difficult to snap out of the hypnotic trance of solidity of the self. But nothing is lost. Nothing is lost when you see clearly. But the world gets very, very vast and interwoven. And so then our practice is to touch this and to return to it by relaxing and opening so deeply that we can find the space of releasing a bit from that ancient grip. All right. So pause there for now.